Welcome back. Tonight's lesson is going to be a little bit different because there is going to be very little math in this at all. It's actually more like English, and you're probably thinking, well, why are we doing it? Well, it's going to help you with logic, meaning being able to see a pattern. So that's what you're working on right now, is seeing a pattern with what they call conditional statements. Now, think about a condition. So a condition is saying, well, if this happens, then this should happen. So conditional statements are like if-then statements. So everything we're doing today is going to be sentences with if to then. So let's get started. Now you should have a guided notes page in order to follow this along so you don't have to copy everything down. So if you don't have that, make sure that you get that before you start writing this down. So if-then is also called the conditional statement. And so if-then has two parts. The first part is called the hypothesis, which is the P. The letter P is what they use for that. And then the Q is represented as a conclusion. So right here, you should have P with an arrow and a Q. So that means if P, then Q. So if this happens, then this should happen. So for example, if we have a statement like basketball players are quick, we could turn that into an if-then statement. We could say, well, if you are a basketball player, then you are quick. All right, let's try to do some other sentences that maybe aren't necessarily basketball related. So let's say that we have the statement, doctors are smart. So the hypothesis, or the P, is about the doctors. So the first part of it should be if you are a doctor, and the conclusion will be then you are smart. Now, we're not sure if that's completely true, but that doesn't matter at this point. What matters is that we know how to put it into an if-then statement. Okay, now something more mathematical is we could have adjacent angles have a common side. So the first part, or the noun, would be the adjacent angles. That's your hypothesis. So you can say if you have adjacent angles, or if angles are adjacent, then they have a common side. And if they have a common side is going to be your conclusion. So that's all we're doing here, is you getting to understand how do you put a sentence into an if-then statement. Okay, the next part then is a different type of if-then sentence. So the second type of sentence is called a converse. The converse is the opposite of the if-then, or it's opposite of the conditional. So instead of having you write the hypothesis first, you're going to state the conclusion first. So the symbol, which is right here, should be if Q, then P. So all you're doing when you're writing these sentences is you're taking the if and making it the then, taking the then and making it the if. So let's look at an example. So the sentence, the regular if-then, says if you are 21, then you are an adult. So in order to make the converse, we're going to switch the if and the then around. So you'll say if you are an adult, then you are 21. And again, we're not determining whether this is a true or false statement. All we're doing is understanding the pattern. So a regular if-then changed to a converse is you are switching the if and the then around. So if we try the second example, and I'll give you a minute if you want to try it by yourself, if angles are congruent, then they have the same measure. So again, you are just taking this and switching it around. So if they have the same measure, then the angles are congruent. It's that simple. And you can abbreviate if you want. Okay, so those are the first two. Now, next, in order to do the next set, we have to know what negation means. The negation means the opposite of the statement, or the not of the statement. So you can write opposite here, or the not. So the symbol for opposite, or the not, is this little kind of squiggly sidewards S. This means the word not. So you can either write it as not P or not Q. So for example, if you have the statement, an angle is acute. If you want to negate it or make it the opposite, you say the angle is not acute. Simple as that. All right, next example, a ray bisects an angle. The not P right here would say a ray does not bisect an angle. All right, now what about number 3? This one says all angles are not congruent. So how would I make that the opposite? Well, you'd probably put another not in there, but 2 nots are going to cancel out. So it's going to really be all angles are congruent. All right, so we need to know how to negate in order to do the next part. So the third type of sentence is called the inverse. The inverse is the negation of the if-then, or another word we use is the conditional, the first condition that we had. So if you look at the symbol for this right here, it's going to be not P and not Q. So all you're doing here is you're putting nots into both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So let's look at the first example. It says if 2 angles are vertical, then they are congruent. Well, the inverse would be if 2 angles are not vertical, then they are not congruent. So all you're doing is putting nots in there. That represents the inverse. Example number 2, if points are collinear, then they are on the same line. Again, in order to do the inverse, we're just going to put nots in there. So if points are not collinear, then they are not on the same line. All right. Last example, the contrapositive. The contrapositive is now the last one, which is the negation of the converse. So if you look at the way the letters are positioned here, not only do we have nots, but we're also switching the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the hypothesis is going to be last and the conclusion is going to be first. So you'll switch and make it a not. So right here you need to flip the if-then and change to nots. So let's look at an example. If you are a boy, then you are strong. So if we switch that around, and we have to put nots in there. So this one's going to come first. This is your conclusion now coming first. So if you are not strong, because again we have to negate it, then now we'll use the hypothesis. You are not a boy. Well, that's clear. All right, next example then. If you are sad, then you are not happy. So if you are sad is your hypothesis, and you are not happy is your conclusion. So we need to switch those two around and put nots in there. So if you are, wait, there already is a not, so now we're going to take it out. So if you are happy, then you are not sad, because we need to negate this one that's not negated yet. Okay, so let's wrap it up and let's review real quick. So this last one on practice, I'm going to pause it for a minute and let you try it by yourself, but I want to just review quickly how the letters go. So the regular conditional, or the if-then, is represented as P and then Q. So P is your hypothesis, then your conclusion. The converse is switching the hypothesis and conclusion around. So you're just going to switch the if and the then. All right, now if you can remember that, the next two are exactly the same, except they have the nots in there. So the inverse is the same as the if-then. So the I's match, if-then, inverse, they match. They have the same order. The only difference is it's not P and not Q. The converse matches the contrapositive, C and C, converse, contrapositive, and they are exactly the same, except, again, they have nots in them. So that's the order. If you can remember that pattern, then you'll be able to make your sentence. Okay, I'm going to pause it. If you want to pause it as well, give you a little intermission, and I want you to try this one by yourself. Alright, if you didn't have enough time, hit pause and try it by yourself. And I'm going to go through this quickly so you can see how you did on the last one. So the conditional is putting this into an if-then. So your if-then statement would say if angles are adjacent, or you could just say if you have adjacent angles, then you form a linear pair, or it forms a linear pair. Okay, the converse is you switching them around. So the linear pair is going to come first and the adjacent will come second. So converse is if you form a linear pair, then the angles are adjacent. I'm just going to abbreviate for time's sake. Okay, and the next one then, the inverse is you're going to make it not. So you're going to say if there is not adjacent angles, then it does not form a linear pair. And then the last one is you're basically going to take this and flip it around. So you're going to say if it does not form a linear pair, then it is not adjacent angles. Sorry, the last part was a little messy, but I think you get the idea. You can rewind it if you need to.